What exactly are the Diaz brothers waiting for? Well, we have some information, some news, and we can use our thinking MMA hats, which I know the comment section truly adores when we put on our MMA hats. I say that sarcastically. In terms of what they want to do next. So you have Nate Diaz, who an article recently came out in terms of him ripping, was it Michael Bisping and Tyrone Woodley. He caught up with TMZ Sports. We'll get to that in just a second, because the first news is that Eddie Alvarez is going to fight Dustin Poirier at UFC 211, and that came just at the aftermath of an MMA Hour show where he was on and he discussed how Nate Diaz turned down a fight. We have a little clip from that and then a quote.
You know, he looks at me funny in lobbies and shit like that. So I'm like, you know what, worst comes to worst, Nate will definitely fight me. So I was actually shocked when they gave him a bad agreement and he said no to that. I thought he'd fight me for sure. So I don't know what's up with him. So we're just trying to get somebody that I can get excited about.
So he ended up getting Poirier, which is fine. It seems like he's excited for that. He wanted to be on the UFC 211 card in Dallas. I'm not surprised. I think it's going to be a huge turnout. If you remember, it was it Canelo who fought in front of in Dallas, and it sold out the whole damn arena. It was in Texas. There's a fight audience in Texas. I'll give him that. And then also Alvarez later said that money changed Nate Diaz. And here's a quote from that piece. I understand his thought process. I have an idea of what he's getting paid. It wouldn't make sense for him to take a normal paycheck for him to fight me, all in regards to Nate Diaz. It would make more sense for him to wait 10 years and possibly get Conor, rather than have him fight me and be impatient. But eventually you're going to have to get back in the cage. Time is ticking. We will see. In terms of Nate Diaz, is Nate Diaz right to wait for Conor McGregor?
Well, that quote, you need to understand it. Of course money's changed him, because money was something that he was never getting in the UFC. He was often underrated. He was often treated differently. Him and his brother fought consistently for years. They would take whatever fight the UFC would give to them. They were veterans. They were basically crucial cogs in that machine so that the UFC could continue to keep working before the likes of Conor McGregor came around, and with all the mass and the audience that he's attracted, where Nate Diaz now has the ability to pick and choose. So I would never discredit Nate Diaz for doing that. I mean, you're not going to go back to eating 99-cent Cheetos if you've been eating caviar for a while. Don't know where that came from. Quote me on it. So yeah, I think that he's gonna continue to take advantage of an opportunity that he was never granted before. As we know that Dana White was never the biggest fan of the Diaz brothers, because they did cause some controversy outside the octagon for him, and they were never the easiest to work with. But you can't take anything away from how much they love the sport and how much they put into it. So yeah, Nate Diaz is not gonna have anyone tell him who to fight, and I think that he has earned that opportunity after being a warrior in two specific occasions, fighting the biggest UFC star.
One of the things that Eddie Alvarez touched on is, like, you're gonna have to get in the back in the cage eventually. I think people should know by now, I'm a big fan of Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz has been known, and I'm quoting some other people when I say this, he could write a book against the idea of ring rust. Daniel Cormier feels if you don't fight for a long time, you get rusty, which logically makes sense. Although Dominick Cruz is the complete counter to that, because Cruz didn't lose for 10 years until he lost to Cody Garbrandt recently at UFC 207. And before that, we're talking about 1.5 years injuries, an insane amount that he went through, fighting with plantar fasciitis in each feet and holding on to a title while that was all happening for the UFC's in Cruz's case. So I'm not sure about ring rust in Nate Diaz's case. I think he's another exception like Cruz. Maybe people like Cormier feel like, and fight like Cormier, need to have the constant fight on their calendar, because I look at it and go, well, Cormier is also a little bit older. Yeah, well, don't get me wrong, Nick Diaz, I think, and Nate Diaz is younger. Nick Diaz is 33 at this point.
Nate Diaz won a fight that he got asked to take on like 2 or 3 weeks notice, and then he lost a fight that he had ample time to preparation. So,
which probably worked in his favor. 2 weeks notice.
So I think Nate Diaz kind of, you can't categorize him as someone that needs to consistently be in there to remain consistent and keep up with that momentum, because yeah, he's got phenomenal technique and he's a remarkable fighter, but what sets him apart is his tenacity and his kind of warrior mentality that is always going to be there. It's not going to kind of die off unless you're talking 5-10 years from now.
So and then Nate Diaz caught up with TMZ Sports immediately after UFC 209 outside the T-Mobile Arena in Vegas, and Nate Diaz fired some shots.
Lee, who do you want?
Listen, okay, you want to know the truth right now?
I want the truth, brother.
So,
I talked to Michael Bisping already in New York about doing this fight. So there's more money for him if he takes a fight with me. Because we were talking about a catchweight fight. He's talking like, you know, as if it's gonna be hard to make the weight. I'm like, come on, you know, it'd be a non-title fight. So after I whoop his ass, he still keeps the belt.
Right.
So that's more money. Then you go fight GSP.
Right.
Same with George. I'm just doing more numbers than he is, so you're gonna make more money to fight me.
So you think you're a bigger draw than GSP? You're a bigger draw than GSP?
It makes sense because they haven't fought before.
Best welterweight fighter.
That's when they make sense.
Woodley calls himself the best welterweight of all time. How do you feel about that? He's not?
Did you see that fight?
So shots fired at a lot of people. For one, there's a lot of interesting things he touched on. If that's true, and he did talk to Bisping for a catchweight, he's right. If they did fight, lots of money. Diaz has not been back. Nick Diaz has not been back in the ring for a while. Not the ring. Sorry, the octagon for a while. The last time was a no contest overturned by the Nevada Athletic Commission against Anderson Silva. Suspension. We're just waiting. And the more you wait, the more you want to see Nick Diaz fight because, of course, now the Diaz brothers have become mainstream household names. Before they were a little bit on the underground. The UFC fans that have been around since like even the Strikeforce days, which is where Nick Diaz really had most of his significant career wins and runs before he was fighting the UFC. Like they were the underground, they were warriors. We understood why people loved them. Now they're mainstream. So now you're going to pick up the idea that you have a warrior mentality, as we've always mentioned, on top of the idea that it's a money fight. And if you were to fight Michael Bisping, yeah, Nick Diaz is a bigger draw than Michael Bisping. Bisping's going to fight GSP, and if you put Diaz in a fight with either of them first or after, it will do more pay-per-view buys, it will do more money, regardless how long GSP has been outside of the octagon, and regardless how much he is the people's champion and has earned the respect of all the fight fans out there. He's not the same type of household name at this point that a Diaz brother has become.
I think that Nick Diaz versus either Bisping or St. Pierre is going to be a phenomenal fight. I think him fighting Bisping makes sense because Bisping clearly is ready to go and is waiting for another fight. And I think that Nick Diaz would be a phenomenal matchup just because both of them have such a out of the octagon kind of attitude.
They fit the same mold.
Yeah.
Before we move on, Bisping is a yes man the same exact way that both Diaz brothers are. They will take fights on short notice. They both have. The reason Bisping has the belt is because a week and a half before, he said, yeah, I'll step in and fight. And then he became a champion. He has the most fights in the UFC's, I think he has the most wins. He's also got some of the most fights. I think he's tied 27, 28 bouts. He's old, and he has a title. That's part of what makes the UFC great is the fact that Bisping was fighting at UFC like 87 and lost out. On UFC 100 and lost out on chances where he got close to fighting for a title. And you fast forward 100 UFC cards. It's a long, long time to be around the octagon and still have it in you to hold a title and also defend it. Got to give a lot of credit. So that's why a fight between any three of those guys, Bisping, Nick Diaz, or Georges St. Pierre, depending on what Georges St. Pierre looks like at this point in his career, you're talking about just a complete slugfest that compared to UFC 209 would be great.